Gentlemen, we have come to that moment where we are going to reveal the top 5 running back rooms across the country. And you guys did your list separately, but came up with the same top 5. So the 6 through 10 was a little bit different.
In order.
Check out that other
I
video.
thought we had a little different order, but it was in
they're
order.
identical. They are identical. So what we're going to do, we're going to do this one a little bit differently. We're going to snake our way through it.
Well, we're going to both talk about each one.
Right.
Just each one.
So who gets to reveal which one is which. How about that? So
I think this will also be a better way to do it in the future also, as opposed to
agreed.
One guy going through 6 through 10. We'll just kind of do it that way in the future, but I think it'll be good.
But it gets us, we'll have some fun with this one, and we'll kind of go back and forth, and you guys will each talk about why you have that team in that slot, and we'll eventually get to our number 1 slot. So
then at the end of that, we'll talk about some other rooms that were under consideration to keep an eye, and some potential breakouts and some different rooms. So it'll be fun. We'll let Trev finish his Michigan conversation later too. So cut off.
I'm always good for a good Michigan rant. But okay, gentlemen. So 5 through 1, we're going to start at the bottom. We're going to work our way up. So here we go with the number 5 team on the list. Georgia Tech. Trevor, why is Georgia Tech the number 5 team on your list?
Yeah, when I break down this running back room, I raved about Jamal Haynes, ranking him. Brian and I both had Jamal Haynes ranked in our top 5 running backs in college football, so I don't want to spend too much more time on him. But when you look at the makeup of this room as a whole, they added another – Ryan brought it up at the start of the show. The transfer portal played a much bigger factor in running back rooms across college football this year than what I even thought about before breaking down some of these lists. Now, I look at who they brought in. They brought in a running back from Pennsylvania, Malachi Hosley, one of those two. I apologize for –
I'm going Hosley.
Okay. Malachi Hosley. He played 444 snaps last season. He has 16 career starts. At Pennsylvania, he had 1,192 rushing yards off of 191 carries, 6.2 yards per attempt. He also added 9 rushing touchdowns. They also bring back Chad Alexander, who was Georgia Tech's 3rd leading rusher last season, 58 attempts, 280 yards, 4.8 yards per carry, also added a touchdown on the ground. Georgia Tech kind of checks some of the boxes when I look at running back rooms as a whole. They kind of have their star power player in Jamal Haynes. They have a really good rotational back in Malachi Hosley, an 1,100-yard rusher last season, 9 rushing touchdowns to go along with that, also added 89 yards through the air. And then they also have Chad Alexander kind of rounding out the group. Quality back, somebody that I'm not expecting to take a bunch of carries this upcoming season, especially with those top 2. But I definitely like Georgia Tech as my number 5 room. Brian, why do you have them as your 5th?
Because you need 2 ingredients, in my opinion, to have a top 5 room. Number 1, you need a dude at the top. I do think you need a dude at the top, and they have one in Jamal Haynes. And I think he's going to have a very big season. But then after that, do you have anything beyond him? So if he rushes for 1,200 yards and your next 2 guys only combined for 300, you may not sniff some other rooms as a whole that are going for 18, 19, 2,000 yards and providing big production. They're probably at the bottom of my top 10, if in my top 10 at all, if they don't get Malachi Hosley in the portal. Now, he's not Jamal Haynes goes down in week 1, they're fine, like we talk about with Notre Dame and Jadarian Price, which is why the top 2 running back rooms are in sort of I'd say the top 3 running back rooms are sort of in a league of their own, in my personal opinion. But I think with Hosley, you're getting a legit experience back. You mentioned 1,000-yard rusher last season. You watch the film, he's a good player. He lacks elite speed. That's the one thing he lacks, but he's got great vision. He's got very good feet. He fits the system very well. He gives you a legitimate guy that can be a 1 if your 1 goes down. He's not on the same level as your 1. And then Chad Alexander's a good football player as well. And now you can use him in different ways. They also have a young kid that I like named Trelane Maddox that I could see getting more opportunities this year as well for them. So I just really overall like the depth that Georgia Tech brings to their running back room as a whole. But they've got the stud at the top and the depth. And they also have a quarterback that can take some of that pressure off of them as well, which makes it's not why they're here, but it helps them become even more effective by having to go against that. And then my number 4 group, Trev, and it says my name, but we have the same exact 5. It's Texas A&M at 4, and honestly, Trevor, it's similar to my conversation I said earlier. If I knew for a fact that Le'Veon Moss was going to be 100% healthy, they might be higher on my list because there's a lot of things about this room I like. And like Texas, they're getting a talented player back who missed last season with an injury that's going to help them out. So when I look at them, obviously it starts at the top. It starts at Le'Veon Moss. You and I did it when we did our breakdown of Texas A&M. We talked about he ran for 765 yards and 10 touchdowns last year. It's not going to knock anybody's socks off. He only played 9 games. And in the 9th game, he had 2 carries for 8 yards. So he did almost all that production in 8 games. He was on pace for almost 1,300 yards last year if he just stays on the same path that he was in all year. He was the guy that started to wear Notre Dame down in the 4th quarter of that game, and then they went away from that, which I still don't understand why they did that. And then all of a sudden Notre Dame was able to kind of run away with it. Not that Notre Dame wouldn't have won anyway, but they were leaning on Notre Dame a little bit, and he was a big reason for it. But it's not just him. Amari Daniels comes back, who's a really good number 2 back, good slasher back. He ran for 661 yards last season for Texas A&M. He's a guy that can be a number 1 if you need him to. Not quite. He's not as dominant as what Le'Veon Moss was. And he also was a lot less effective when they didn't have Le'Veon Moss because his teams could kind of key on him. You know, last couple games of the year against Auburn and Texas, he had 111 yards on 40 carries. That took his yards per carry average down a bit. But you know, he's another good back, guys. Really nice complimentary player to Le'Veon Moss. And then they also get Reuben Owens back. And Reuben Owens is a guy that some people thought was going to challenge for the starting job last year. I didn't necessarily agree with that. I didn't think he was going to be that kind of guy. But he's a good number 2 back also. He's someone as a true freshman, ran for 385 yards, but like we talked about C.J. Baxter, only averaged 3.8 yards per carry. He was a little bit better late in the season, went for 5.2 against Mississippi State, 106 yards, 5.9 per carry against Abilene Christian. And then he did return late last year and played in the last 2 games of the season. He went for 3 carries and 10 yards against Texas and then had 13 carries for 56 yards in the bowl game against USC. So I don't think Reuben Owens is what some people make him out to be. Like, this guy might push Le'Veon Moss for the starting job, but he's a really good depth player. And so they have a stud at the top, and then they have good depth. And if you want to know what separates Texas A&M and Georgia Tech for me, it's that right there. It's Amari Daniels and Reuben Owens are better, I think quite a bit so, than what Hosley and Chad Alexander are for Georgia Tech. That's really what separates. And now I do have Jamal Haynes ranked higher now, but you understand the asterisk type of aspect to that ranking. If Le'Veon Moss was not injured, he's probably a top 3 or 4 back. And a healthy Le'Veon Moss from last season is probably ranked ahead of Jamal Haynes for me. He is ranked ahead of Jamal Haynes for me, and I'm a big Jamal Haynes fan. So that's why Texas A&M is number 4 for me. I know you have them there too, Trev. What do you like about the Aggies before we move on to number 3?
Yeah, I echo a lot of the same things that you talked about. I really like the production coming back. Here's what separates Texas A&M and Texas for me, because you know I can understand why some people are like, well, Texas has a guy coming back off of injury, and you guys have them ranked lower in each of our lists. We might not have them ranked as the same spot, but we each don't have them in our top 5. Texas is relying on C.J. Baxter to come in and be that second punch coming off.
If not one, eventually.
Exactly. Whereas Reuben Owens might come in and there's a world where he's the 3rd guy.
Right.
You know, that is ultimately what separates it when I compare Texas A&M and Texas. And
their number 1 is just better. Sorry, Le'Veon Moss is better than Wisner. He just is.
Agreed.
He just is a better back.
Agreed.
Their number 1 is better. Their number 2 is better. Their number 3, I give the edge to Texas. I actually think C.J. Baxter is a better running back than Reuben Owens.
Yeah.
And then if you go Owens 2, maybe he's better, than Amari Daniels, maybe. But I still like Texas A&M because their number 1 is better.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Our number 3 overall team on both of our lists is Louisville, the backfield that we already referenced, Isaac Brown. Don't want to spend too much more time on him, but it's also what returns, and it's young talent in Duke Watson and Kawan Brown. Now, Duke Watson, he played in 12 games last season. He had 587 yards on just 67 carries. The kid averaged 8.9 yards per attempt. That leads college football in yards per carry. He also added 7 rushing touchdowns. He also added a receiving touchdowns. But his 8.9 yards per carry led the nation in yards per carry amongst backs with at least 50 rushing attempts. And that's with a guy like Isaac Brown going for 7.1 yards per carry and 1,100 rushing yards. Then you go down to their third guy, Kawan Brown. He played in 11 games last season, 47 attempts, 243 rushing yards, still over 5 yards a carry at 5.2. He added 3 rushing touchdowns on the ground as well. This is a really, really loaded backfield that Louisville has to work with this upcoming season. And so when I look at them, it again checks the boxes. They have a guy at the top in Isaac Brown that has that star power. And I love the Duke Watson, Kawan Brown rotation coming in to kind of relieve him, because you have, at least with Duke Watson, another really explosive running back. So you're not losing the big playability when Isaac Brown isn't on the field.
If anything, you're getting even more home run ability.
It's almost a similar conversation to what we had last year at one point in time with Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love. Jeremiah Love at one point in time was behind Jadarian Price
for
in yards
a
per
good chunk
carry
of the season.
Yeah.
He was, yes.
Yeah. It's a very similar situation to that. I love Louisville's backfield heading into this season.
Well, and it's nice to have a number 2 back that can make big plays and doesn't need the volume. I mean, Duke Watson ran for 597 yards last year. He only carried the ball 67 times. He averaged 8.9 yards per carry. And like you said, Kawan Brown's a good running back as well. Rushed for 243 and 5.2 per carry. So I also think this group has a lot more pass game potential this season. But if you just talk about, if you're someone who just cares about numbers, these 3 running backs last year went for 2,278 yards, 7.1 yards per play, and 23 touchdowns. That's just the top 3. That doesn't include like what Don Chaney did. Notre Dame's backs in 16 games went for 2,509 yards and 6.8 yards per play, 28 touchdowns. So like this was a outstanding room, and they played well in big games. It wasn't like they just, padded their stats against teams that weren't good, Trev. I mean, they first half of the game, they were making some plays against Notre Dame and against Miami. These kids were making plays. So it's not just the numbers. It's the film is impressive. They've shown that they can kind of take over games. You talk about how many teams can say they had 2 backs that had multiple 100-yard games last season, because Duke Watson went for 104 against Kentucky, 117 against Stanford. And then, of course, Isaac Brown had 5 games of over 100 yards and went for 99 in a bowl game and 93 against Pitt. So, and the other thing, too, is like when one guy's not playing well, the other guy can kind of step in and perform. Isaac Brown gets banged up against Stanford, only has 3 yards on 2 carries. So what happens? Duke Watson steps in the game, carries the ball 11 times for 117 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like we talk about that a lot with Notre Dame. When you can lose your number 1 back and your number 2 guy can step into the game and perform at a high level, like you're doing something, and you're doing something really impressive. And I love this group, and they were young. They were all freshmen last season.
That's the craziest part is how young that room was, man. Insane talent. Insane.
Number 2 is Penn State. I think this is obvious after the conversation that we had the other day on our Irish Breakdown show, where we made the case for Notre Dame being number 1. I love the Louisville room. I think they have a shot to battle against Penn State, but they've got a lot to prove in order to really jump into that number 2 hole. I really like this room. I think the Penn State room is good because they don't use their depth, but they have depth behind their top 2. And here's what I'm saying. Like, we already talked about Nicholas Singleton, one of the 2 to 3 best running backs in college football. And we say, like, well, you can't just look at the best player and say that they're the best room, which we did. Like, the ranking looks like we did, I should say, because we have Notre Dame, Louisville, and Penn State backs as 1, 2, and 3. And then we have, them as the top 3 rooms. But the whole point is each of these teams has a number 2 that is a number 1 for a lot of people in college football. And that's certainly true for Penn State. Nicholas Singleton is a stud. If he doesn't get banged up in the middle of the year, he is their leading rusher. He finished the year last year with over 1,400 yards, 6.9 yards per play, 17 touchdowns. Very talented back. He was a guy that Notre Dame worked hard to try to get out of high school. He ends up going to Penn State. It's a great pickup for them. Katron Allen is one of the best number 2 running backs in college football. The only reason that I believe, and this is just watching a lot of Penn State football, the main reason that I believe, I shouldn't say the only reason, but the main reason I believe he was their leading rusher last year is because Nicholas Singleton was banged up, and they were just trying to make sure they could get him through the year. So some of those games where you needed someone to be more of a volume guy, he was your guy. And he's a good running back playing behind a good offensive line. He had 4 100-yard games last year against Bowling Green, against Illinois, against Oregon. They had both of their backs went for over 100 against Oregon in the Big Ten title game. And then he also went for over 100 against Boise State, played relatively well against Notre Dame. He is a decent weapon out of the backfield, 18 catches for 153 yards, not a big weapon out of the backfield. That's the one thing that separates those two. But that's a really dynamic 1-2 punch. That's an outstanding 1-2 punch for with those two guys. And then the other thing too is they had 2 freshman running backs that I like a lot, that if it wasn't for those 2 guys would have produced a lot more. Corey Smith is a kid they got out of Wisconsin. He was a high school teammate of Owen Strebig. He went for 152 yards last year on 22 carries, averaged 6.9 yards per carry. Very talented running back. He was a very good pickup for Penn State. And next year, when these 2 guys are going into the pros, we're going to be talking a lot about Corey Smith and a lot about Cam Wallace and Quentin Martin as they get ready for that group. But I think Corey Smith is the guy that becomes their number 1 when these 2 guys go pro. I like him a lot. His first game he played last year, first time he carried the ball in a game, he was against Washington. He had 5 carries for 95 yards in that game. He's a very good running back. I'm a big Corey Smith guy. So even though they don't use him, I still count him as part of the room of why the room is good, because if they have an injury to one of their top 2, slide Corey Smith or Quentin Martin right into that and you're fine. Just move everybody up a spot and you're good to go. And that's what, to me, separates these rooms that we're talking about, like A&M and Louisville, Penn State, and then our number 1 group, because they go 3-4 deep of guys that could step up and be really good football players for you. And a lot of teams have like one really good one and then a solid number 2, and then their number 3 is just like, okay, we give them a couple carries. These are teams that even the numbers don't always back it up, can legit step in and be difference makers. And that's what I think separates, because it's easy to talk about Katron Allen, who had a great year last year, Nicholas Singleton. I mean, he had 2,000-yard running backs last year. That's outstanding. I don't care how many games you played. That's an outstanding season. And especially when you consider he had a tight end that had over 90 catches and also carried the football a lot of times last year, because they would just direct snap to Tyler Warren. These kids still went for over 1,000 yards each. So this is an outstanding running back room. There's no doubt about it. And they are truly the thunder and lightning type of 1-2 punch as well. You know, the thunder is obviously Katron Allen and his 1,100 yards, 5.0 yards per carry. He's a big old kid, power back. And then you've got the home run hitter, Nicholas Singleton. So that's an outstanding 1-2 punch for Penn State. But it's more, you know what I mean? It's more than, and here's another thing Penn State gets credit for in my book. They lost a really good running backs coach to Notre Dame when Jawan Sider left to go to Notre Dame and replaced him with Stan Drayton, who's known as a really good running backs coach. He was the head coach at Temple, got fired as the head coach. They hired him to coach running backs. Great pickup. Like when Notre Dame lost Dylan McCullough, it was, man, you lost a stud. You better replace him with somebody really good. And they did. And then Penn State did the same thing by getting Stan Drayton as the running backs coach. That should help them make a relatively smooth transition from a coaching standpoint as well.
Well, look, man, I mean, Penn State has a running back room that even the team that we have ranked at number 1 can't even say. This duo is going on their 4th year of doing this. I mean, you go back and look what Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen have done over the years. In 2022, they combined for 1,800 yards and 22 rushing touchdowns. In 2023, they combined for about 1,650 rushing yards and 14 rushing touchdowns. And then obviously we know what they did last year as well. This has been a very, very productive and impactful duo for Penn State's backfield for quite some time.
Yeah.
And it's impressive, man. There's no way around it. They are the clear-cut number 2 backfield in the country. And it's for a lot of the reasons that we listed off why there is an argument for them to be number 1. I don't want to completely negate that. I don't have them at number 1. Brian doesn't have them at number 1. But if somebody wants to absolutely pound their fist on the table, I can understand some of the arguments.
We would have a friendly disagreement, but I would not be like, dude, you're nuts. It's not
Absolutely.
even close. No, I'm like, all right, look, here's my case for why we don't agree. And we made it in our show the other day. But if you're going to sit there, Trev, like you said, and say, no, I definitely think it's Penn State, and here's why, I'm like, well, it's good arguments. I'm not going to tell you you're nuts for thinking that, because that's an outstanding room.
Absolutely. But with that being said, it is in our number 1 room in the country because we believe that resides right in South Bend, and that's Notre Dame, for a multitude of different reasons. One, they have the most electric running back returning in college football in Jeremiah Love. He is the consensus number 1 running back. I mean, even in some of the rankings in the CBSs of the world, the PFFs of the world that have Penn State above Notre Dame in running back room rankings, they all have Jeremiah Love as the number 1 returning running back in college football. So they check the star power box. But the depth in this room is crazy. And yes, Penn State has the depth in their room as well, with guys like Quentin Martin and Corey Smith and Cam Wallace. But if I'm comparing Penn State's 3 through 5, I'm still taking Notre Dame's 3 through 6 every day of the week. When we start talking about Aeneas Williams,
their 3 is better, their 4 is better, their 5 is better. Correct.
Exactly. And I don't even know if Penn State has a 6 in the discussion with Nolan James. And so when you look at the depth of the talent that Notre Dame has in their room, we all know the explosive player that what Jadarian Price is. 6.2 yards per carry, 7 rushing touchdowns. They have Aeneas Williams, who Penn State should be very familiar with. 34 rushing attempts, 219 yards, 6.4 yards per carry as a true freshman, played in 15 games and became their primary third down running back as a true freshman. And then you have somebody who hasn't really even been unleashed yet in Kedron Young. 5'11", 242 pounds, is going to be that kind of bruiser. I just sit back and think of a day where what's going to happen when Kedron Young gets the Katron Allen volume of carries. It's going to be a rough day for opposing defenses. That's all I have to say. But look, fact of the matter is he played in 30 snaps as a true freshman and carried the football on 21 of them, and scored a touchdown on one of those runs as well. You have Jabron Payne coming back, who's your primary third down guy in 2023. And like we talked about the other day, going to be interesting to see where he fits into that rotation. And then rounding out the group, you have a true freshman in Nolan James that in other years, he would have been your number 3, if not number 2 guy.
Yeah, he's playing as a freshman for a lot of teams in the last decade. Like as a number 2, number 3 running back. Yeah.
Yep. And so Notre Dame is the number 1 team for a lot of the reasons why we listed the other day when we stated our case for them to be the number 1 running back room in the country. But again, like we've said before, the divide between 1 and 2 right now is a pretty sizable gap. But Louisville is going to make a push. Texas A&M is going to make a push to close that gap this season, no doubt.
The difference for me is I don't know that Le'Veon Moss is going to be good and is going to be the same back. Like, I don't know that he can say I'm as good as the Notre Dame guy or the Penn State guy or the Louisville guy. That's what remains to be seen. He's got to show that he can be healthy. But, yeah, I think there's a gap between the number 1 and 2 teams compared to number 3 and 4. And then I think there's a gap between 3 and 4 and what comes after them. So I think there's a very clear top 4 coming back, and then there's not anybody that I would argue belongs in that top 4 right now with that group. And then I think Notre Dame is number 1. You have the best running back in college football, and you have a guy who's number 2 who could start for a lot of the teams in our top 10. And is honestly someone who belongs at least in the conversation for one of the 10 best running backs in college football. The one thing that hurts Jadarian for why I wouldn't put him in there yet is he's got to show me more in the pass game this year as a blocker and pass catcher. But then you don't need him to do that because you've got Aeneas Williams. And it's not even like with Aeneas, it's not like Corey Smith's production all came, hey, you're walking in mop-up minutes. And Aeneas had some of that production last year. I mean, his 50-something yard touchdown run against Army was mop-up minutes. But his catch and then follow-up run against Penn State was not. They were down 10-3 and he made those plays. And that to me is that game showed us why those are the top 2 running back rooms. Because there were different times where those backs took over games. Penn State's backs took over the first half and just were running on Notre Dame, and Nicholas Singleton had the early long catch and run against Notre Dame. And then the second half, the Notre Dame backs took the game over. And it wasn't just Love and Price, it was also Aeneas Williams. And that's what separates Notre Dame, in my opinion, from all the others is that. But you talk about a Jabron Payne, who was very good 2 years ago. Keedron Young is incredibly talented. Nolan James. They've got star power. They got big-time depth, and they're coached well. They have been coached incredibly well so far. We'll see if Jawan Sider can coach them up. I mean, he coached the number 2 running back room in the country, so I don't think it's going to be that big of a drop-off between what Notre Dame had. But there's just they check all the boxes. Say, well, they didn't run for as many yards as Penn State's guys. That's a usage thing. We broke this down the other day. Notre Dame's top 3 running backs went for 6.9, 6.4, and 6.2 yards per carry. Penn State's top 3 running backs went for 6.9, 6.4, and 5.0, and the guy that had 6.9 had 22 carries, and that was all against mop-up minutes. So their top 2 backs went for 6.4 and 5.0. And so it just, more explosive, more efficient, more dynamic, got to the end zone more. Penn State, for example, their top 3 running backs accounted for 27 touchdowns on 474 touches. Notre Dame's top 3 running backs accounted for 28 touchdowns on 367 total touches. So more than 100 touches for Penn State. They averaged 6.1 yard per touch, 27 touchdowns. Notre Dame on over 100 fewer had 6.8 yards per play and 28 touchdowns. So we talked about this the other day, Trevor. If Notre Dame's backs had the same level of attempts, like total touches, that the Penn State backs had, and kept their same yards per touch, they'd have over 3,200 yards, and that includes 4 playoff games where the numbers weren't as good as they could have been because you had not only the injury to Jeremiah Love, but you had injuries to your offensive line. And I think that factors in as well. But there's no doubt these are the top 2 runs and two rooms in college football. And this is a very strong top 4 for sure. A little bit, fuzzier after the top 4. I think there can be some debate about, should Georgia Tech be higher or lower? I think you originally had Georgia Tech a little bit lower and then moved them up before I showed you my list. That's why we are where we are. But that's our top 10. I know we're going to talk about some other rooms, but that's our top 10. And we only had one difference of team, even though we had a lot of different spots, 6 to 10 different.
I know you guys have some teams that you were considering putting into your top 10, or depending on how it's kind of labeled as sleeper teams, and so teams that could have gotten into the top 10, or teams you're keeping your eye on to move into the top 10 once the season starts and goes on. So I know you guys want to talk about the handful of teams that were on the radar to make the top 10, but didn't quite break into the preseason top 10, right?
Trev, who was your first team out? Like if I told you can't have Pitt, Trev, got to get rid of Pitt, who's your next team in?
That's tough because originally when we started off this conversation, when I sent you over my original list, the team that I had in there instead of Pitt was Navy. But after some discussion, a lot around Eli Heidenreich, and their best rusher isn't even a running back on the roster. It's Blake Horvath.
And we kind of decided that Heidenreich is kind of more of a receiver than the traditional slot backs used to be, which is why we went that direction. But, that was an interesting discussion.
Yep. So if not for Navy, I was kind of bouncing back and forth between Oklahoma. Baylor was in that discussion for me. I like the guy that they have coming back. I know they have 2 pretty good running backs coming back, but I think it's the Washington kid that I like from Baylor. So they would be in contention for that number 10 spot for me. So there's a couple in there. Others are a little bit farther away, but off the top of my head, those are probably 2 of the ones that I kind of danced around with.
Yeah, I like the Miami room also. The Miami room was in the conversation for me. They don't have the proven production. That's the thing that hurt them a little bit. Their top 2 backs that are coming back this year had just over 1,000 yards. They did average 6.1 yards per carry. They had 13 touchdowns. Didn't produce a lot in the pass game. They did add Shamar Brown from North Dakota State, but my thing with him is he ran for 1,100 yards last year and 15 touchdowns, which is impressive. They averaged 4.8 yards per carry at the FCS level. Like, I know they play a tough schedule, but I need to see him perform against sort of the best of the best, which is obviously the Division I level. But I need to see more from him before I'm going to fully jump on board of him being a great addition to this room, and that's kind of part of it. I mean, we saw him play against Colorado last year, who is not exactly the epitome of a great run defense, and he ran for 33 yards on 9 carries. So I'm kind of skewed by watching him in that game.
Yeah.
And being like, okay, how good is he really? And that might be a little bit unfair, but I do really like their 1-2 punch. I think it's a very good duo, and they're going to be able to replace Damian Martinez quite well. They were a group that I looked at, and I'll tell you, speaking of sleeper groups, the Big Ten has a couple that I like. We Indiana's could have a really sneaky good room, but a room that I couldn't put in here because of the lack of proven production is Michigan. And I also don't know who Michigan's 3 is. That hurt them as well. But their 1-2 could end up being really good when you look at, obviously, Justice Haynes, who I'm very high on. Justice Haynes. Trev, you and I have talked about this in multiple shows at Irish Breakdown. That was one of the best sneaky under-the-radar portal pickups for anybody in college football last year, and Justice Haynes, getting him from Alabama. And then Jordan Marshall was a top 100 caliber running back coming out of high school that picked Michigan, who had a knee injury last year. He's healthy, had a great spring. They're a sleeper room to keep an eye on, but the lack of production just kind of kept them from being in that conversation for me. And there's a couple rooms in the Big 12 that I looked at too, Trevor. And Kansas State's got an interesting room that I could see them being a top 10 unit by the end of the year. Obviously, we know about Dylan Edwards. He had 546 yards last year on 5 touchdowns as the number 2 back behind DJ Giddens. He averaged 7 yards per carry. They had Joe Jackson, who was a young running back last year too. He had 227 yards in the touchdown, 5.8 yards per carry. Gabe Irvin transfers in. He's been kind of all over the place. He didn't do a whole lot last year. Nice depth player, but they got an FCS transfer from Southeast Louisiana that if he is as good as I think he can be, and I have a harder time projecting the FCS guys, but he could have the impact for K-State like Malachi Hosley had for Georgia Tech, where he could kind of step into that role and be that. The difference is with Georgia Tech is they already had a proven, established 1. Kansas State doesn't. Dylan Edwards was an outstanding number 2 last year, but can Dylan Edwards at his size be a number 1? That's going to be a key. But we've only seen Dylan Edwards be a number 1 in 1 game, Trevor. That's it, just 1 game. But the reason that I had a hard time keeping them out is because in that 1 game, which was a bowl game last year, he went for 196 yards and 18 touchdowns against Rutgers. First time all season he carried the ball more than 10 times a game. And he went for over, almost 200 yards. And they have a quarterback that can kind of take some of the burden off him. But between Joe Jackson and Antonio Martin, that 1-2 punch behind him, K-State could end up having a really good running back room by the end of the year. I just need to see it. That's what kept them off of it for me, Trev, is the same thing with Miami. There's a lot of rooms like that, man, this room could end up being really good. And then there's another one that I had a tough time with. There's 3 in the SEC that I really like, Trev. Florida's got 2 really good young backs coming back, Jaden Ball and Jacoby Jackson. They also have Trey and Webb on their team, but Jaden Ball and Jackson rushed for a little over 11 or a little under 1,200 yards last year, had 14 touchdowns, both over 5 yards a carry. I just need to see them take their game to another level. They're both really good number 2 backs. Can any of them step up and be a number 1 back? That's a question mark. I like that room. I think LSU, if I had more faith in LSU's offensive line, and the other thing is, like, Caleb Jackson has not done it for me yet. I just don't love what I see. If he can have a breakout year as the number 2, he could help, or even number 3, because they got a freshman coming in Harlan Berry that is really good. And Caden Durham, obviously, is a good player too. Those are some of the ones that I looked at, Trev, and there's one more SEC team I want to talk about if you don't. But I just realized I went through a bunch of teams, and I want to make sure that I leave you some room to talk about a couple of the rooms that you like as well.
No, you're good, man. The thing that was tough for me when I put together this list, a lot of the teams that were close, like I think they have decent production. Like I think about the Miami room. I love Justice Haynes going to Michigan, but I think compared to the top 10, they lack that guy at the top.
Proven guy,
I love Justice Haynes, that move going to Michigan. Am I going to take him over, like a Jamal Haynes? No, I'm not.
Right.
Mark Fletcher, Jordan Lyle. I think that's a good 1-2 punch at Miami. Do I think that that's a better 1-2 punch at, like a Texas? I think it's comparable, but I think I'm still going to take Texas's.
Right.
And so that's what kind of left some of those teams off of some of mine.
And then
bottom.
like the one team that doesn't have that proven number 1 in our top 10 is Georgia. Mm-hmm. But the difference with Georgia is they're more proven at 1, 2, and 3, or 1. They're just as proven at 1 and 2, but their 3 to me is better than some of these other teams. And that's what kind of separated that a little bit for me also is. And I just think as an individual player, I just think Nate Frazier's a potential stud. And I just think he's a better player than some of those guys.
Well, and that's what's so weird about Georgia is because they're like one of the few teams that you look at in terms of like a good season at Georgia is not the 1,200-yard season. Georgia hasn't had an 1,000-yard back in a minute, but a good season for them because they distribute the ball so much is kind of that like 700 to 900 range, and that's very much in the realm of possibility for Nate Frazier. I mean, he almost did that last year and he only started 3 games.
I could see him being their next 1,000-yard back.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it at all.
I could see that.
Yeah,
I could see that. Like I could see him having a year or 2 jump if the line plays better. But to your point, Trev, they haven't had a 1,000-yard running back since 2019 to DeAndre Swift.
Yep. So I evaluate them a little bit differently than I would another running back room having like that stud guy. It's more of kind of you go back, you watch the film, who's that go-to person or go-to people that they have. You think of DeAndre Swift, you think of the Nick Chubb, Sony Michel duo. So plays a little bit of a factor as well. But you and I had some very similar, like sleeper teams almost made it in. And so who's you said you had another,
I know. Tennessee is my unit. Is that I look at. Like they got to prove it. I don't know that these guys can do it, but when I watched their backups last year, there's some talent there. I remember Peyton Lewis coming out of high school. He was a guy that I liked out of Virginia. I think Deshaun Bishop's got some talent. Bishop went for 455 and 6.2 per carry last year, and Peyton Lewis went for 339 and 5.3. They also got Star Thomas out of the portal. He had 871 yards at Duke last year. So that's another guy. So that's a room that I'm like, okay, they're not in there now, but that's one I'm like, let's see how that group goes. Let's see how that group is able to develop and perform behind a new look offensive line. But that's another one I have to have in my eye on. And here's the one G5 other than Navy that I'm looking at. Don't sleep on the backfield at James Madison. They've got a really interesting situation. They had a kid that transferred in last year from North Carolina who had a very good year for them. And George Pettaway, he's from my area, played at, I think he played at Nansemond, Suffolk. But he transferred to James Madison. And in his first year at James Madison last year, had a pretty good season. He went for 162 yards, 980 yards per carry. 980 yards total, 6.1 per carry, 5 touchdowns as a sophomore. Joby Mallory comes back. He averaged 6 yards a carry. Wayne Knight comes back. He averaged 5.8 yards a carry. And then they also had a kid transfer in from I think it's North Texas, who was hurt he transferred in last year from North Texas, and he was expected to be the starter. His name's Ayo Adai. In 2023 at North Texas, he rushed for 1,017 yards and had 7.1 yards per carry and 6 touchdowns at North Texas, and went for 807 the year before that and 7.2 yards per carry. And then as a freshman at North Texas, went for 496 and 5.9 yards per carry. So that is a deep, without question, in my opinion, the best G5 running back room in the country next year, and could be one that you're going to look at and say, y'all should have given them more consideration for a top 10 overall group.
All right. I think that's going to do it for our preview of the top 10 running back rooms in college football. So these guys did a lot of work, put these lists together. Really appreciate you guys breaking it down for everybody and kind of giving everybody a taste of what's out there in college football, and not just Notre Dame and their opponents. And so that was a great list that you guys put together. Really appreciate that. Should be a lot of fun. We've got other lists and things like that coming down the pike throughout the rest of the summer. So you're going to want to stay locked in, not only to the Irish Breakdown podcast, and then of course our CFB Nation site as well, because there's going to be a lot of college football based lists and shows and things like that moving forward. So you want to stay locked into Irish Breakdown for all that good stuff. And so, of course, you want to jump onto the boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com for our premium message board. And then, of course, also irishbreakdown.com for written content and great stories and insights there. And, of course, hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, and share with your family and friends. Share it with your enemies, too. It's good. You just want to get it out there, get the word across. So share with everybody that you know. We'd really appreciate that. And it doesn't cost you a dime. So we appreciate the effort, folks. And this is one big happy family, and we're glad that you're a part of it. And so IB Nation Sports Talk is coming up in a few minutes. So you want to check out that. I believe there is an interview pending with Carter Carls, who follows Texas A&M. So you're going to want to check that out. And then, of course, I believe Jesse and Sean will have rapid fire following that. So IB Nation Sports Talk in a little bit. And we will be back tomorrow. And everybody knows what tomorrow is. It's Friday. It means it's the Friday free-for-all mailbag. And so myself, Brian, Trevor, will all be there. And so we appreciate you guys hanging out with us for today. So until then, we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast. A wonderful evening, everybody.